What is going to be the reaction of those who've been out on the streets, to this parliamentary vote? And also, is Iraq in a position today to defend its sovereignty if foreign troops were indeed to leave the country?
Well, if anything, if what their demands have been anything to go by, this is not going to be welcomed by all of these people who were demanding an end to foreign influence, especially Iranian influence in Iraq's affairs. You saw those protesters in Tahrir Square. At least 500 of them have been killed in the last few months as Iraqi government carried out a crackdown when they tried to enter the green zone. And then the Iraqi government allowed the Popular Mobilization Forces to go in and essentially lay a siege around the U.S. Embassy compound. So it is a divisive issue. It is not being welcomed already by these groups, especially the Kurds in the north who boycotted this session. The many Sunnis in the far-flung areas outside of Baghdad, they don't want this U.S. presence to end because they see it as a guarantee for their rights. They don't trust the Iranian-backed forces. They accuse Iranian-backed forces of carrying out a lot of sectarian crimes, they say, after the defeat of ISIL. So it is an issue which is going to be playing out in the next hours and days in Iraq, because it is not something that every Iraqi agrees or disagrees with. What this has done, this assassination of Qassem Soleimani and Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, is that it has united people in saying that there needs to be an end to the impunity with which the United States operates in Iraq. You also heard it from the Iraqi Prime Minister himself, saying that Soleimani was coming to Iraq with a message from Iran. He was going to meet him in the morning, but he was assassinated, saying that this is not the mandate of the U.S. forces and not the mission that he had agreed upon, and saying that his priority number one is to end the presence of foreign troops in Iraq. Whether it's going to happen, how long is it going to take, it is going to play out in the next few hours and days.
Thank you for that, Osama bin Javaid, live for us in Baghdad. Lawrence Korb, he's a former Assistant Secretary of Defense, and he's going to give us his reaction, I guess, Lawrence, first of all, to this decision by the Iraqi parliament to expel foreign troops, including U.S. troops. What implications for the U.S. military presence in this region?
Well, it's not surprising because even before we assassinated Soleimani, we had launched attacks on several bases in Iraq over the opposition of everybody in the Iraqi government, the president, the prime minister, the foreign minister, the Ayatollah. And then, of course, the Iraqi government has already condemned these attacks. And so it's not surprising that they're asking us to leave. And this is, I think, a consequence of not thinking through when you take an action. You say, well, Soleimani was bad, we got him. Yeah, but now you might not be able to fight ISIS, which is a bigger threat to the U.S. and its interest. You've also turned both the Iraqi people and the Iranian people against the U.S. Before this, the Iraqis were demonstrating to get Iran out of Iraq, and the Iranian people were demonstrating because of all of the problems that they have. Now they're both, against the United States.
And this is happening as Patty said, 3,500 U.S. troops are being deployed to the region to protect U.S. assets and U.S. interests. What's going to happen to them if this decision by the Iraqi parliament does go through and is approved by the government?
Well, the question is, do you bring them home? The president can say, as he did in Syria, well, we've defeated ISIS, I'm bringing them home. But, it's important to keep in mind, despite what the president said, if you count the people on the carrier battle groups that we deployed to the Persian Gulf, the forces we sent to Saudi Arabia after the oil facilities were bombed, we've got about 20,000 troops in there from a president who said he was going to get us out of the region. If anything, he has increased it, and he's undermined what the Pentagon says. No, we don't want to worry about the Middle East anymore. We need to worry about China and Russia. They're our main strategic competitors.
So do you think there's a clear and solid strategy here, or is this just, they're just doing this on a day-by-day basis?
Yeah, there's no strategy. In fact, when they presented the options to the president, they put the killing of the Iranian general on top, I'd say that he wouldn't select that, so it's more likely he'll select some of the more reasonable options. They were surprised when he accepted the Soleimani, assassination, and they were not prepared for it.
Okay, thank you very much for speaking to us. Lawrence Korb, live there in Washington, D.C. What will it mean for Iraq first?
I think that's probably the most important news we've heard since the assassination of Qassem Soleimani. In fact, I would argue this is probably the most important news that we've had since 2003, since the United States invaded and occupied Iraq. Because the idea of Iran and Iraq coalescing against the United States to push the United States out of Iraq will probably create a new center of power around Tehran that of course, if the Iraqis decide to go along with Iran, that will probably be a formidable challenge to the United States and everyone else in the region. So this is the big issue, because everything else, Foley, is a bluster. And we've heard the last 24, 48 hours, a lot of bluster, a lot of threats and counter threats and retaliations, and I want to bomb 52, I want to bomb 48, and this and that. And this is all, of course, important, and they could escalate, and there could be a mission creep here, even rhetorically speaking. If deterrence doesn't work, we'll hike up the deterrence. If force doesn't work, killing Soleimani, maybe more force will work. But in the end of the day, all of that is bluster. The big thing, the big transformation is what will happen in Baghdad. I would pay more attention to Baghdad than to the bluster that we've been hearing.
But, you say that Iraq, if Iraq is turning its back to the Americans now, the Iraqi government, so Iran is the only choice left as an ally. But as we've seen on the streets of Baghdad and Mosul and elsewhere in Iraq, protesters there, the people, the Iraqi people, don't want Iranian influence either.
Absolutely.
So,
and in fact, Iraq does have other options. Its most important option is its Arab hinterland. I think every Arab country now would die to join Iraq, help Iraq, even its Saudi, Emirati, Kuwaiti neighbors would be more than happy to chip in order to keep Iran at bay. So Iraq does have options. Iraq is a rich country, and despite the occupation of the United States and the meddling of Iran, it remains to be a solid sovereign country and has more than capable people in order to, build the economy, build the country, and so on and so forth. But Iran does have influence in Iraq. And this is the big thing, and this is the big story for us between the United States and Iran. The United States worked according to strategy, to geopolitics. Iran depended on its geography, its close relations, its religion, Shiaism, all sorts of connections cross-border with Iraq that allowed it so much influence within the country. The question is, will it use it or abuse it? Clearly, a lot of people think it's a lot of abuse going on in terms of its relationship with Iraq.
So what options then does Iran have now following the assassination of Soleimani? It has to respond somehow. If it doesn't respond, it will be seen as weak.
Absolutely.
But it doesn't want to risk an all-out war with the Americans either, given that they're already engaged in other conflicts in the region, in Yemen and Syria. When and what do you expect their response to be?
What is clear to me, and contrary to all the, I don't want to say conventional wisdom, but certainly the apocalyptical predictions about World War III and about regional war, I don't think that's going to happen. Mostly. Because I don't think Iran wants to go head-to-head with the United States. The last time another power in the Middle East went head-to-head with the United States, it was destroyed, regime and country, and that's Iraq in 2003. I think Iran will avoid a confrontation with the United States at any cost. What it will do, it will continue what it did in the past, which is low-intensity warfare, proxy conflicts through its allies and clients in the Middle East, and it has a wide range of issues of possibilities through clients, whether it is in Yemen, in Lebanon, in Syria, and Iraq, and so on and so forth. And the United States still largely exposed in a good number of countries. And that's what President Trump wants to do. He doesn't want to pull out of the Middle East. He wants to pull out of the hot spots of the Middle East. And just to remind people around the world about something very similar, not only did the United States do that in Somalia and Lebanon, that's what Israel has been cleverly doing in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Syria, pulling out troops from Lebanon and Gaza and then using drones, guided missiles, air force, cyber, and so on and so forth to hit its enemies.
So not pulling out, really?
Redeploying.
Right.
The idea is to redeploy. And the United States, when it, as your guest said before, when it redeployed out of Syria, it didn't redeploy necessarily back to the United States. It redeployed to ships, to Navy, to various bases it has in the region. It has the 6th Fleet and the 5th Fleet still in the Gulf and in the Mediterranean. And by the way, just so we're all clear on some strategic 101, the United States needs to stay in the Middle East because it doesn't want Russia and China to come into the Middle East for the void. Just two simple figures. China imports more than half of its oil from the Middle East. Japan imports 90% of its oil from the Middle East. If you want to control the energy sources of Japan and China, what should you do? Well, you should control a lot of the ins and outs of the Middle East in order to put your competition in check. If you want to have an advantage over China, you maintain control of the Middle East.
Marwan, thank you very much. As always, very good to get your insight on this.